Hi everyone, I'm Garrett Gilchrist. The difference in this first scene is that Koopa is there, pursuing Samantha Mathis here, and there's some shots in here that are from the trailer, which were transferred by the Super Mario Brothers movie archive, and a lot of this is in the movie but covered by credits and whatnot. And I've included a few shots here specifically from the trailer in very high quality, which were scanned at about 4K, and which are open matte, which show the full picture, which is rare and very important. We only have the trailer in open matte. This VHS shows a lot more picture. In this case, I've used an app called Remini to improve the faces. That shot right there is almost all CGI at this point. So the TV host and Luigi's faces were improved here heavily using the app Remini and EBSynth, which is a style transfer program. I was able to improve the look of one still image vastly. In this shot, that's a shot from the theatrical cut of Mr. Scapelli, which was extended using EBSynth to basically construct. EBSynth is a style transfer program which was also used in a lot of these shots to improve the quality. If I had a frame from the theatrical cut in higher quality, you can see there's some EBSynth for just a few seconds or a few frames in this scene to improve the quality at cuts. Like that whole shot of Mario right there is heavily EBSynth improved, and some of this shot, because I don't know how this was transferred, but it looks like the colors here in Mario's shot have been EBSynthized and heavily improved and brought up, because this was a very dark scene. But whenever it cuts from a dark shot to a light shot, the colors change a whole lot. So on every cut in this scene, I tried to Photoshop a new version. There was also Luigi's head was covered by cigarette burns, which denote a real change. And I had to use Dane motion estimation, which I also used on some other shots like the TV host earlier, to improve those, to put Luigi back into those scenes, basically, by slowing down the material. In this scene, I had actually put in some color using CGI, using Deep Remaster and EBSynth based on what was in the theatrical cut, because I wanted to put the theatrical cut's video over that shot of Iggy and Spike, those first couple scenes of Iggy and Spike. But it's very dark, like the VHS is very dark. This was Remini. This shot of Luigi right there was improved using Remini to improve the look of a couple of still images, and then I used EBSynth to render that improvement over the motion. I only did that on a few shots here, but EBSynth is a style transfer program where you basically have an image sequence of the shot that you want to improve, and then you put over it a new keyframe which is colorized or is improved in some other way, like sharpened up or taken from the theatrical cut, and then EBSynth will try to match that motion to the full shot. Nice little romantic moment with Mario and Daniela here. I did nothing special in particular here, but these the VHS was very dark, so I've heavily reduced the contrast here to bring out as much detail as possible, and also heavily noise reduced it. The VHS ran at 60 frames per second, and I cut that down to 24 frames per second using various techniques, including EBSynth's S-Restore function. And I've cut out here any scene that is significantly extended into a 33-minute reel. But basically the 60 frames per second low quality VHS, I reduced the contrast using various blending modes, multiply, screen, overlay, all sorts of things to bring out more of the whatever detail was in there. Our first transfer of this VHS was very low quality and was sent to me by Stephen Applebaum of the Super Mario Brothers Movie Archive about a year before we actually started any work on this, because the first VHS transfer they gave me was very low quality. And because VHS is an analog medium, a lot depends on how good your VCR is and how good that transfer is. So what was sent to me originally was not good, and I didn't know if the actual VHS looked better than that or not, but he then sent me whoever was transferring it sent me some short scenes which looked better than the full transfer. So I was like, you can do better than this. Can I have a better transfer of this stuff? And it took a year to get 2 better transfers of this stuff, which I then combined. I actually painstakingly matched 2 different transfers. This took like a day of editing to put 2 different transfers of the same VHS tape over one another. One was brighter and sharper because it was like an SVHS VCR with a lot of sharpening in it. And another was softer but had better color. And I thought they could both be of value if you put them over one another. But that also required a lot of editing and careful looking to see when each VHS transfer maybe glitched out or dropped frames or had other issues. So it was actually a lot of editing to get the 2 transfers to match. And then at that point, I color corrected them and I pasted a whole bunch of different versions of them over one another until it reduced the contrast a bit and brought out more detail in what was actually there, because the dark areas and the bright areas of this lose a lot of detail. And once I'd done that, it's not a high quality VHS, but I think we did as much as we could with it, with the material provided. And then at that point, it was also a matter of cutting it down from 60 frames per second to 24 frames per second, which this has a rolling shutter, unfortunately. It looks like a camera of some kind was filming it off a screen or something, because it just sort of blurs into one another, and the top of the frame lags behind the bottom of the frame on every frame. So at cuts, I had to go in and Photoshop out the splices, because this was a work print which is actually spliced together with razors and tape. And there's a shot of Koopa walking up on some scaffolding, which was taken from a couple of rare trailers, and also was EBSynth and upscaled and downscaled and photoshopped as much as I possibly could to get a better result. This whole scene was upscaled using Topaz AI Gigapixel, which is a still image upscaler. They do a video upscaler, but we figured that the still image upscaler was a lot harder core, like the still image upscaler could do more to fix the image. So this is a sharper version of it, because we upscaled and downscaled. And I've done a new effect there of when the technician dissolves into goo. So this whole sequence was sharpened up heavily due to upscaling, and Jonathan Fly helped me with that. But I also used EBSynth and Photoshop and all kinds of like by hand trickery so that the technician basically dissolves into water. I had a couple of stock videos of water which I'd combined, and then I went through frame by frame by frame. I did an EBSynth run on the Technician, which originally looked like his head was just exploding in a very gory way, and I wasn't able to use that because it was very gross. And this whole sequence was heavily sharpened, and EBSynth was also used here to extend the shot of Koopa's eye. You see a big close-up on Koopa's eye, which is very high quality, and I used EBSynth to make that quality last a little longer, but I was using the shot as it appears in the theatrical cut, which actually is a different effect on the eye. They redid the effect on the eye to be a little more obvious. But EBSynth I didn't use heavily on this because it's very slow to render, and but it allows me to match the quality of the theatrical cut Blu-ray for a few seconds, basically. It'll smear after a bit because EBSynth's whole thing is that it's about creating living paintings. And so it does start to look smeary after a bit, but it will match the motion of a theatrical cut image, which looks a lot better than this VHS for a few seconds. So I can then kind of transition and dissolve from one to the other. And I'm going to be doing a lot more of that maybe when we do the actual cut. I'm supposed to cut this into the actual movie, or somebody will, back and forth. That's probably the next thing. And at that point, I might be doing more renders of the theatrical cut, like really high quality frames from the theatrical cut Blu-ray, and then transitioning them into this with some EBSynth renders, which will extend that quality for a few more seconds, a few more frames. And I've done a lot of that later with a scene of Mario and a Bob-omb. But this whole VHS is open matte. It shows the entire image as shot on set. And the Blu-ray, you realize, is very cropped compared to this. And I prefer the framing of the open matte version. So we actually need a new transfer of this whole movie that is open matte and isn't as heavily cropped, because it is very heavily cropped. And these two scenes were, again, considered more important. The mud bath and this little cigarette scene and discussion with the girls. So I put more effort into these scenes. They were upscaled and then downscaled again and sharpened. So they're sharper than the raw VHS tape was. But there's also, I put more work into removing splices because this is an older movie. And when I was a filmmaker at film school, in 2003, I also edited movies with a razor and tape. And so at every cut, it jumps up a little bit for a few frames. It like wobbles, and you can see a little line of tape where two shots were spliced together. Sometimes several times in the same shot if there were a lot of fights about the editing of a scene. Like the mud bath scene, there were clearly a lot of fights about that. And you can still see splices in this reel, like right there, in the middle of shots or at cuts where I haven't removed them. But I went into Photoshop frame by frame to remove these splices. And also, because this is a rolling shutter that where the top of the frame is always a little bit behind the bottom of the frame. So every cut, it was always very obvious that the top was trailing the bottom. So for some entire scenes, I had to work very hard to like go back to the 60 frames per second version and combine like 4 different frames into one to get a clean. There's a nice Remini shot there of Daisy. I used the Remini app, which can improve the look of shots of faces, which are low quality. So I did a few, like 4 keyframes. And there's a shot from the trailer. And there's another couple shots from the trailer, and I've used a lot of color correcting and hand Photoshop and EBSynth to sort of extend that high quality for a little bit for the entire shot as much as I could. But yeah, Remini app improves, I only used it briefly, but it improves the quality of a face shot. So when I had a nice heavy close-up of Daisy there, Remini app was able to make that look a lot nicer. And then I used EBSynth to render that whole shot to look as high quality as that. And that's something I'll probably do more of with the theatrical cut if I have time. I could have done more to like transition from the theatrical cut to this longer cut in these deleted scenes, because a lot of times they're just extended versions of shots which exist in the theatrical cut. So you could actually extend that high quality for a few seconds with EBSynth, and I did that on a few scenes. But it's very fiddly, it's a lot of work, and I was already removing lots of splices and mess on the cuts and hand removing how the top of the frame kind of lags behind the bottom on every frame. There's some scenes where that was very obvious, so I was going in by hand and removing that on some of the more important scenes. We also upscaled them frame by frame and then downscaled them again so we could get kind of a sharper look to it, and cleaner look. And generally, not on every scene, like not on this scene, but I was going in frame by frame, going back to the 60 frames per second version and photoshopping together cleaner versions of every cut, like removing the splices, removing damage. I did like thousands of new frames, which were cleaned up and combined from multiple frames. And I actually, on some scenes, you can see there's a time code at the bottom of the screen, and I had decided that the best version of each shot, the best version of every frame was the last frame as seen in the time code at the bottom of the screen. Because I had 60 frames per second to choose from, and we were cutting it down to 24 frames per second. I'd already noise reduced it, cleaned it up a lot using neat video and a lot of trickery and color correction. I love how unfinished this shot is. It's CGI in the final, and you can see the back of the set here, which is rare. But I'd actually gone through frame by frame on some scenes to select which frame I wanted out of the 60 frames per second. So that was a lot of work that was probably unnecessary, because the automated system in EBSynth, which is called S-Restore, can actually cut it down to 24 frames from 60 frames automatically. So that was a little unnecessary, because it wasn't always a better result. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But I did put in that work to select which frames I wanted, frame by frame by frame. It's interesting how fetishy this boom boom bar sequence is, especially uncut and open matte, because when you crop it as much as the theatrical cut is, you don't see as much of what's going on. But there's definitely dancers in bikinis, like reptile dancers and everything. And Iggy and Spike do a rap. And this was one of the major scenes that I put a little extra work into, photoshopping out all the splices and damage and upscaling and downscaling it again. At least the rapping part was important. But yeah, it's a little sexed up for a kid's film anyway. A little bit, like the design is a little fetishy. And I think that's more obvious in the open matte. I've always wondered, like, when I was editing this, it really does seem like this version, this uncropped version, is a lot closer to what the movie should be than what you actually get on Blu-ray, which is way cropped down from this. It's somewhere in between. Like, we need a version that's less cropped and transferred open matte. That would make a better version to sort of transition and dissolve back and forth from. This is another shot where I've put the theatrical cut over it and EBSynthed it for a few seconds. Like when someone walks by there's like a little dissolve away from that. And this wrap was upscaled and downscaled again and sharpened, and a lot of frame by frame cleanup was done. at cut points, because it was considered one of the more important extra things. Iggy and Spike doing a little rap here to show that they're against Koopa and the system now, and then they get arrested. And all of that got cut. Not all of the shots, but definitely all of the shots that you see here. Anyway, their little rap. So I put a lot of extra work into this Photoshop-wise to clean up all the cuts. You'll see that when every scene cuts, it's very clean in this sequence without like jumps and splices and bits of other frames showing at the cut. And that's a lot of work. So we could really use an open matte version of the full movie. I think that would be the next big thing that's actually needed, especially when creating an extended version like this. I would have to blow up the VHS more than I want to in order to match it to the theatrical cut. I think Bob Hoskins looks drunk here. Either he's drunk or he's playing drunk anyway. His whole thing with Bertha is very nice. That's a shot from the trailer, although I think basically that whole thing is also in the movie. It's just the trailer is open matte. So like this shot also is in the trailer. Well, it took two different trailers. They transferred two different trailers. So that shot of the Mario Brothers in their kind of red and green classic outfits bits of that were in the trailer. So I used EBSynth to try and make that shot look better overall. And you can see how much work was put into it, which isn't great. When you can see how much work is put into a shot, that makes it not a great shot. But I did put a lot of work into those shots, and the shot of going through the window, there was like EBSynth renders to try and match the quality between the two trailers, which look great and are open matte, and between the trailers and the VHS, which is obviously a lot lower quality. There's a lot more burning here. Daisy with putting out the Goomba there, I think was Toad. And there's something from a trailer in here too, which was a real mess, but this shot was extended from what's in the trailer. This shot was replaced with a new effects shot. This whole scene was replaced with new effects in the final version, but a bit of it is in the trailer, so I extended that using EBSynth. And this was also extended using EBSynth and Remini for Koopa, but using the theatrical cut for Daisy calling Koopa a murderer. It's actually one of my favorite shots that I did for this. We used, I used the theatrical cut, nice high quality frames of Daisy, and then I extended that using EBSynth to fill in the middle of the shot, basically, so that we could match that quality throughout the shot, and it ended up looking a lot nicer than the VHS normally does. It looked a lot more like the theatrical cut. And I've done that with a few shots here as much as possible. You can definitely see how on every cut, like the color timing of this movie changes a lot, and that really was a pain and something I only tried to fix on certain scenes, but like it'll be like very green or very red on a cut suddenly, and then or very bright, very dark, and both, and then it'll gradually change, because I think it looks like it was recorded with a camcorder off of a screen somewhere, you know. Which is like on auto exposure. So it's not consistent, and that was a bit of a pain and something that I tried to fix in some important scenes, like the Scapelli scenes earlier. Here's a little extension from a trailer right there, which is not in this longer cut, but was in a trailer, so I used it, a little extra Goomba shot. And yeah, generally I did a lot of cleanup on cuts, not always. And I tried to leave in blue screen shots and shots where you can see like the wires or the green scaffolding as they're doing this very long stunt. So you can kind of see more of what they were actually doing. You might have seen my restoration of The Thief and the Cobbler Recobbled cut, which took me 8 years from 2006 to 2013. As well as my restorations of the Jim Henson Hour, Little Muppet Monsters, and tons of Jim Henson specials. I restored Evil Dead 2 deleted scenes from the Mexican TV version. I've done lots of film restoration. I'm a filmmaker myself. I did a film called Shamelessly She-Hulk about the Marvel superheroine, the She-Hulk. And I've got a YouTube channel. I've animated Doctor Who and Adam Adamant, classic British TV shows from the 60s. And I was learning a lot of new techniques and experimenting with stuff that I think nobody had done before. Like this is an EBSynth shot of Fiona Shaw as Lena, which I extended because it's longer in this VHS cut, and I wanted it to look as good as it does in the theatrical for those extra frames. So I used EBSynth to render that. I did a lot of color correcting and hand fixing. I also did Remini tests on a lot of these shots, which I didn't actually do. This is a trailer shot right there, and there's a shot from the theatrical. And I've tried to transition seamlessly from the theatrical to the VHS. This whole scene with the bomb, these close-ups of Mario especially, I've improved to a much higher degree to make them look like they do in the theatrical using EBSynth. I've taken what's in the theatrical cut and what's in the trailers, and I've rendered that over the motion of the VHS using EBSynth because it's a style transfer program which makes your video look like your keyframes. So I keyframed stuff from the theatrical cut. So this is a scene, the Mario with the bomb, I put a lot of work into to try to make the whole thing look as good as the theatrical cut and yet be the uncut footage, basically, which is just a lot longer in this edit. We even used Dane, which is a motion slowdown. It's a slowdown motion estimation program to render some new frames to combine two shots on Mario's close-up. And we've done that with a few shots here to just smooth over stuff that's broken and messed up here and there using just slowdown. It's rare, but it's something we've done. Like the shot of the TV host early on with Luigi watching that. I used Dane to fix that because that's almost an entirely CGI shot at this point over the original. I'm not sure what I'm saying makes any sense. It's like, this is the problem with The Thief and the Cobbler. My restoration of that took 8 years, and there was so much work put into it that I could no longer explain what I'd done, basically. That scene on the construction site, we did some slowdown to generate like a new frame here and there, and I took out all the splices, except like when the Goomba appears, but like mostly took out the splices at cuts for a lot of these scenes, and also took out how the top of the frame lags behind the rest of it. Yeah, here's some shots without effects. That's always a fun thing to see what they actually shot. And yeah, a lot of just scenes which are in rough format without the effects that they intended. And we really, getting this to a nice, clean 24 frames per second version was definitely the first step, like trying to get it to look as nice as it possibly could from this VHS. And then from there, it's just like, I just keep working it and working it and working it. I pick out specific scenes to work extra hard on, and then I just went through it and frame by frame by frame worked extra hard on it where I thought it would be most appreciated. or where I saw an opportunity because maybe there was a nice close-up of somebody which I thought I could restore to full quality or something like full quality. Like Mario with the bomb, you know, there's these nice close-ups of Mario. Like right here, I did that. So I created a green screen image of Mario for that, just that shot. I used the theatrical cut and I extended it. But I also painted out the background behind him to be green before I rendered it so that I could use the background more from the original VHS and it would just be kind of clean and seamless. And then EBSynth rendered the rest of it to look like the theatrical cut. So we get here's a new like skinny T-Rex, like a depowered T-Rex effect that you don't actually see in the final. And this pizza scene, I went through frame by frame in Photoshop and really cleaned that up. That was one of the things I worked hardest on because it's got so much movement that you can tell that the top of the screen is lagging. So I wanted to fix that. So I just went through and there were a lot of splices in it too and I fixed it. Here's the extra happy ending. These were also scenes that we upscaled and downscaled again and sharpened. I think Jonathan Fly, who's an AI enthusiast researcher, did a lot of that for me, was nice enough to do that. And I consulted with my friend Alex Douglas this whole time. But we upscaled these and downscaled them again, frame by frame, and sharpened them up. So it's a sharper, it's the same source from the VHS, but it's just going to look a little sharper in these scenes. Because it's nice to see Yoshi in the Koopa Square and see everybody kind of celebrating. But they used the song Smile Darn Smile from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is really showing what their priorities were here when hiring Bob Hoskins, I guess. And this little kiss, that got cut because he's got to leave her behind. And you don't even see Yoshi and the Goomba in this version. This was a hard scene because it's so dark. So some of it's in the theatrical. But what's in the VHS is really hard to discern. So for this shot, Mario is CGI. And I had to sort of motion track. He wobbles a bit. It doesn't quite work. But I had to sort of motion track an EBSynth, the look of the theatrical cut, and some little Photoshop extensions of the dark sides of their faces just to make it, just to have something that you could motion track. This scene has also been EBSynthed a little and extended using portions of the theatrical cut. Like that ending with the TV host, I always cleaned up the TV and extended every shot using EBSynth. And these are the trailers here, which have been, they were transferred at 4K very nicely by the Super Mario Brothers Movie Archive, and I've shrunk them back down to the SD size of this edit so that it matches, and I've also warped them to match. So you could drop these back in the movie a little bit, like this should match. So I was also using these as source material for a handful of shots. There's not much in these trailers that isn't in the movie, but it's also open matte, so you can see these full, slightly cropped effect shots, and you can see how the movie would have looked uncropped. And I think it was intended to be a lot less cropped than it actually is on Blu-ray and DVD, unfortunately. So yeah, there were specific scenes that that I worked extra hard on for a few weeks, just going through and frame by framing it and making it look as nice as I could manage. And I hope you enjoyed that. And at some point, this is probably the next thing, I'm going to go in and rework the whole thing to cut it back and forth with the theatrical cut, probably. The frame rate looks messed up here. Hope that's not my fault. That might just be the computer I'm looking at. But the VHS, that's sort of been my specialty over the years with the Jim Henson Henson rarities. I restored a lot of Jim Henson projects from VHS because they're not available officially from Disney anywhere on home video. And so I'd learned to clean up VHS with neat video and with going through frame by frame to take out glitches. But this was especially a very difficult production because it's a bad quality VHS. And I did my best to bring out everything, every bit of quality that we possibly could in it. And I hope you enjoy seeing these extremely rare deleted scenes from Super Mario Brothers, the movie, 1993, in the best quality that we could get out of that VHS. Thank you for listening.
Our goal is to restore the footage for a new definitive home release. If you'd like to inquire about the project or have information or additional materials, please contact the Super Mario Bros. Movie Archive at admin@smbmovie.com. We'll be publishing additional unseen footage as well as a commentary, so be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, trust the fungus.